Okay, today we are looking at converting equations from standard form to vertex form. These are quadratic equations. We've seen standard form before with the quadratic formula ax squared plus bx plus c. Typically it's equal to 0. Now it's going to be equal to y. Same thing. And we will need to transform that and rewrite it in vertex form. Okay, and so we have vertex form here. Now vertex form is helpful once we start graphing because we can look at the equation and immediately tell what the vertex is. All right, so our vertex is going to be h and k, which we've seen this before, the transformation stuff. The vertex h here is always opposite of what your x tells you. All right, and then our k value is our y value of the vertex, and that always is what it says it is. It is not the opposite. The only one the opposite is one that's inside the parenthesis with the x. Then we need to identify our axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is that invisible line that cuts our parabola in half. All right, so it's always going to be x equals, and it's going to be the h value or the x value of our vertex. So whatever that x value of the vertex is, that's going to be our axis of symmetry. And then the last thing we'll need to look at and identify is our a value, whatever number we have out in front of our formula or of our equation. If that a value is positive, if it's a number that's greater than 0, a positive number, that means our parabola is going to be opening upwards. And if our a value is less than 0, like a negative number, okay, if we have a negative a value out front, then our parabola is going to be open downward. So let's look at how we're going to transform these equations from standard form to vertex form. So this is going to be very similar to our completing the square that we've been doing for the last few days. Now I want to rewrite this equation. I want to move my y to the other side, kind of like we like if it were completing the square. Let's move the y to the other side, and then our rules for completing the square, we need to move our constant to the right. So my plus 8, I want to get rid of it and I want to move it to the right. So I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides. So I've got x squared plus 6x. Now I have room for my blank space. I've got y on my right. I subtracted 8 on my right side as well. And again, I need a blank space as well. Okay, just like completing the square. If you got a blank space on the left, you need a blank space on the right. Now, to fill in the blank, remember there's 2 steps. Take half of 6, which is 3, and then square that, which is positive 9 on both sides. Okay, we have a shortcut here to factoring the left-hand side. We know we need an x. Half of my middle term, half of 6 is positive 3, so that's what goes here. And then we've got a y. Combine those like terms. Negative 8 plus 9 is positive 1. All right, so we're almost done. We just need to get the y by itself. So we got to subtract our 1. So we come to the other side and subtract our 1. So I've got x plus 3 squared, and we subtract our 1 equals y. So we'll say y equals x plus 3 squared minus 1. So it's very similar to completing the square. So again, if we are identifying our vertex, letter B says to identify the vertex. The vertex is going to be an x and a y value. Remember, the x is always the opposite. Okay, always do the opposite of what your x is. So if that says plus 3, then my vertex is going to have an x value of minus 3, negative 3. And then my y value is out here on the end. That one is what it says it is, so that one's a negative 1. There's the vertex, negative 3, negative 1. Now the axis of symmetry, that's the letter C that we're going to fill in the blank here, always has to be x equals. And then we look at the x value of our vertex. Here, the x value of the vertex is negative 3, so that's my axis of symmetry. And last but not least, the direction of opening, we look at the a value, whatever number is out in front of our parenthesis. Here, there's not a number out front, so really there's an invisible 1. And since it's positive, then that means our parabola is going to open upwards. All right, next problem. Again, we want to rewrite the problem. X squared plus 2x. We want a blank. Okay, now I want to move my y over here, but then I also need to move my negative 12 to the other side, which would make him a positive 12. Okay, and it might help if you scratch that equals y and put it like that. Okay, so if I add 12 he goes away, and I would add 12 on the right side. So I have a y plus 12 on the right. Now I have room for my blank space here, and I need a blank space on the other side as well. So let's go ahead and do the shortcut of factoring as well as filling in our blanks at the same time. So I know I need an x. So half of 2 is positive 1, but that's not what goes in the blank. I need to take that positive 1 and I need to square it. So 1 squared, 1 times 1 is actually, it is still 1. So we put a positive 1 on both sides. So on the right side, I have a y, combine those like terms. 12 plus 1 gives me 13, positive 13. And then to get the y by itself, we're going to subtract the 13. So I've got x plus 1 squared, subtract 13 equals y. So we're going to say y equals x plus 1 squared minus 13. And again, the vertex, I need the x and the y value, so opposite of what your x says. So I need a negative 1, and the y value is a negative 13. Axis of symmetry always has to start with x equals, and it's always the x value of my vertex, so it's going to be a negative 1. And finally, the direction of opening. Look at the a value, the number out in front of your parenthesis. If there's not a number, just like the last problem, is a positive 1. Positive a values out in front of your parentheses means that we open upwards. That parabola is going to open upwards. Let's go to the next problem on the notes. All right, so if I rewrite this and I put my equals y on the other side, all right, first step for completing the square, we're going to need to we're going to move our negative 4 over by adding 4 to both sides. So I've got x squared minus 10x. Now I've got room for my blank. My right side has a y plus 4, and if I have a blank on the left, I need to have a blank on the right. So let's go ahead and factor this with our shortcut as well as filling in the blanks at the same time. I know I have an x. Half of negative 10 is negative 5, but that's not what goes in the blank. I have to take that negative 5 and square it. So negative 5 times negative 5, positive 25. Positive 25. So the right side is going to have a y, and then when I combine those like terms, that's positive 29. The last step to getting y by itself, we need to subtract 29 from both sides. X minus 5 squared, subtract 29 equals y. So y equals x minus 5 squared minus 29. My vertex, the x value is always opposite of what it says here, so it's going to be a positive 5. The y value always is what it says it is, so negative 29. Axis of symmetry always has to start off with x equals, and it's always the x value of your vertex. So here we're going to have x equals 5. And then the direction of opening, again, I have a positive a value out in front. There's an invisible positive 1, which tells me that we open up. And the last problem on the notes here. Again, we're going to scratch out the equals y. Let's move it to the other side. All right, so before I complete the square, I have to move my constant of positive 7 to the other side. So we're going to subtract 7. X squared minus 2x. Now I've got my blank. On the right, I have a y minus 7 because I had to subtract the 7. And I've got a blank there as well. Let's go ahead and factor and fill in the blank at the same time. I know I need an x. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. But now I need to square that. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Put that into both blanks. So the left side's already factored. The right side, I have a y, and now I need to combine those like terms. That was a negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. Then we're going to have to add 6 to get the y by itself. X minus 1 squared, add 6, equals y. So we've got y equals x minus 1 squared plus 6. My vertex, the x value is always opposite of the x, so positive 1, and the y value is what it says it is, positive 6. The axis of symmetry always has to start off with x equals, and it's the x value of the vertex, which is 1. And again, the direction of opening, the a value out front, we have an invisible 1 in front of our parenthesis. Positive a values tell me that my parabola opens upwards. Okay, so we will have we'll have an assignment on that, but those are the 4 problems from the notes.